Tonight, I'm going to be talking about coping with the diagnosis of Marfan syndrome. And let's see here. Okay, this is just a picture of the University of Florida's Heart and Vascular Hospital, which is where we see our patients. It's a 3-year-old building and it's pretty new and it's very handy. So coping strategies can include things like education, of course, support, connection, physical exercise and activities, and advocacy. And I'll get into each of these separately. Education includes finding out a lot of information about the medical diagnosis. When you're diagnosed, usually when people come in, we spend a lot of time talking with them about Marfan syndrome. Some of them have done their homework ahead of time, but we do go into lots of details with our patients. Of course, cardiac and aortic workups are real important. Our patients get CTs and they get echoes. Our doctors go over those with them so they understand and they can actually see on imaging what's going on. We talk about musculoskeletal differences such as scoliosis and other things, muscle pain, joint pain. We recommend that people see an ophthalmologist every year. An ophthalmologist is different than an optometrist. Ophthalmologists actually dilate and look at the back of your eye and they look at your lens because sometimes the lens is displaced. And we also offer all of our patients genetic counseling, which involves doing at least a 3-generation family history, asking about people's health, etc. And then we talk about how the inheritance of Marfan works. Of course, it's autosomal dominant. And we talk about other family members. We also offer the testing prior to clinic when people come in. If we have their insurance, I find out what their out-of-pocket cost would be. So right up front, they know that too. The way that we're doing it right now is through saliva samples mostly. So support. The Marfan Foundation is the best source for information and connections. You can connect with other people. You get lots of good information. The Marfan Foundation is very active and we find them very, very helpful. So we always talk about the Marfan Foundation with all of our patients right up front. We encourage people who have been newly diagnosed to educate their family and friends about their condition, that you can get good support usually from family and friends, and it's very helpful day to day. Sometimes there's other counseling that people need. Dealing with emotional stress when you've got a lifelong condition can be challenging. Sometimes family planning would be one of the things that we talk about. Of course, we do talk about the inheritance pattern, but there are various sorts of options for family planning. And then also financial concerns sometimes cause stress for families. This is the Kubler-Ross change curve, and it deals with different reactions that people have to having a diagnosis. Some people in the beginning have shock and denial. Sometimes people get angry. Sometimes they're bargaining or they're blaming themselves. Sometimes people settle into depression, thinking that things aren't going to change. And they look forward to kind of some of the things that might come up in their lifetime as far as complications go. Eventually, most people get through acceptance and exploration, and they problem solve, and they integrate having Marfan syndrome or any other condition into their life. All these things don't have to happen in every single person, and sometimes people kind of skip around from one thing to the other. Connections. We feel like it's really great to have a medical team that you can talk to and a medical team that you can ask questions, someone that you connect with. Your medical team becomes very important, and in most cases, we want to see somebody every year. There are support organizations like the Marfan Foundation. There actually are others too. There might be something locally that you could join. And the connections with others who have similar concerns is really important. You can meet people through the foundation. You can meet people through, sometimes we can connect people with other people that live near them. The way that we do that is we contact the person that we think would make a good connection with the person who'd like to have the connection. And we have the person that we would like to connect with our patient contact them directly. So it has to be mutual consent. Exercise and activities are really great for people with, people with and without Marfan syndrome. People with Marfan syndrome need to choose appropriate exercise activities. We want them to avoid strenuous lifting and high contact sports. One of the things that could be considered, I think that some people don't think about as much, might be yoga, meditation, or mindfulness. Those things can help relieve stress, and they can be very helpful too, and they're calming. We also think that it's a really good idea for people to volunteer. You can volunteer for different activities with the Marfan Foundation. There are also other groups out there that aren't related to Marfan that you could volunteer for, and it makes you feel good. Most of all, we want people to exercise, have activities, and have fun. Live your life. Advocacy for self and others. You need to advocate for yourself. A lot of people, even people that I come in contact with that I assume probably know about Marfan syndrome, they might have heard the word, but they really don't know what it is. And so we all have an obligation to educate other people. And when you educate other people, there's more awareness of what's going on with Marfan syndrome and other conditions. You can get involved in lots of ways. Walking for Victory is a really good thing. We have had walks for the last several years. And there are many of them around the country. It's a lot of fun. You get to meet a lot of people and you make good connections. And it's actually a very enjoyable day. The Marfan conferences are also a really good thing too. There are national ones, there are local ones, and also there are webinars and Zoom meetings that you can connect with, and you can find out about those through the Marfan Foundation. So thank you. We have been real proponents of the Marfan Foundation, and we love the families we see. We're grateful to participate in your care, and you make our work worthwhile. Thank you.
Thanks to everybody for attending this webinar tonight. I'm Allison. I live in Chapel Hill, North Carolina with my husband, Neil, our 6-year-old son, James, 4-year-old Naomi, and our senior dog, Hatch, who I think would rather not have me share his age tonight. Our son, James, had rapidly deteriorating eyesight starting at about around 15 or so months. And when his ophthalmologist suspected that he may have Marfan syndrome, we went for an echocardiogram, which was when he was clinically diagnosed. Genetic screening a couple of weeks later confirmed that he had Marfan syndrome, and that happened just a couple weeks shy of his 3rd birthday, so he was pretty little. When I think back to the year following James's diagnosis, it is impossible for me to overstate how incredibly sad and difficult that period was for our family. We definitely kept ourselves busy with follow-up doctor's appointments and learning as much as we could about Marfan syndrome. But whenever there was a quiet moment that Neil and I had to ourselves, we found it profoundly difficult to truly accept the diagnosis and to face the cards that our son had been dealt. It wasn't fair. Many aspects of our lives had already started to change, and we had to let go of a lot of assumptions that we had about the future. And for a number of months, I didn't really have a name for a lot of the feelings that I felt, which made it really hard to talk to other people about. But then we were guided by a friend of my husband's that suggested that what we were experiencing was grief. There are many commonalities between receiving a medical diagnosis and grief. And in fact, Jill brought up the Kubler-Ross curve, which I think is a really great illustration of that. So when you're grieving, you are coming to terms with a profound loss and you're recalibrating your life under a new set of circumstances. When we were going through the early stages of our child's diagnosis, we felt very isolated, and that we felt like this acute pain that we were experiencing would never end. But I can tell you that nearly 4 years later, it doesn't really get easier, but you will get better at dealing with you or a family member's medical condition. You're going to evolve, you're going to pick up new skills and new habits. And what I was ultimately really surprised to discover after James's diagnosis is that I started to be able to see opportunities that came alongside the diagnosis and how those were impacting our family in really wonderful ways. I personally noticed that I was living more presently in the moment. I developed much more compassion for other people. I felt a very strong sense of purpose in my life. And I also got the sense that going through this together as a family made my husband and I better parents, and I hope better people too. And so I realized that for me, it was very important to channel my energy in a way that felt both healing and productive. So about 4 or 5 months after James was diagnosed, I started getting involved with the Marfan Foundation. And fundraising for the foundation has given James and our entire family the opportunity to give back and ensure that everybody with a connective tissue condition has access to support and resources. When we started meeting people with connective tissue conditions, it became incredibly clear how amazing this community is. Now, it's not without challenges and pain and fear and loss, but it is also full of love, support, and hope too. And I know I'm totally biased here, but James is such an extraordinary kid. We are very proud of him. He openly talks about his diagnosis. He loves educating other people about Marfan syndrome. At the age of 4, James traveled to Capitol Hill and visited the offices of his then representatives, where he advocated for himself and for others rare disease patients like him. Now, I know that James is only 6, and I recognize that we have hard times ahead of us, but I do strongly believe that the work we did together as a family and the experiences we went through during the early years of his diagnosis set us up not only to cope with James's condition, but also to thrive too.
The last few years of my life could be summed up by the word challenging. It had been challenging to catch my breath running up and down the basketball court. It had been a challenge when my back and body ached from scoliosis. It was a challenge recovering from the NUS procedure, and it was the NUS procedure is a surgery to insert a metal rod across my chest. It essentially popped it up into place. Those challenges were explained on July 20th, 2020, when I was diagnosed with Marfan syndrome. I finally had a diagnosis for my physical ailments, but the biggest challenge was now beginning. How would I deal with this diagnosis emotionally? I had always defined myself by my athletic ability. I was a tall kid, the one that could block shots and jump higher than others. I played varsity basketball as a sophomore, and I was cutting down nets in tournaments and getting better every day. I practiced 7 days a week, and basketball was my life. But it was all taken away from me the day of my diagnosis. All contact sports were permanently banned. I'm not much of a crier, but on that day in the hospital room, the tears flowed. Who was I supposed to be if I was not an athlete? My world turned upside down in an instant. I'm not going to lie and say that I immediately had this sunshiny attitude. I struggled, and there were some dark moments. I questioned everything about my life. My mom stood by my side, as did my coaches and my teammates. They supported me before I was strong enough to ask for support. As time passed, however, I realized that I needed to do more for myself. That's when I reached out to the Marfan Foundation. Through them, I found out about teen support groups. I discovered ways to raise awareness for this disease. I learned how to write lawmakers and ask for additional research funds. I even spearheaded the drive of February 2021 and declared it Marfan Awareness Month in Kentucky. This provided me with an opportunity to speak to news outlets about my disease. I shared the signs of what to look for and what people can do to get involved with the cause. It gave me the courage and confidence to speak to my basketball teammates about living every day to its fullest and not taking anything for granted. Living with Marfan syndrome is a daily challenge, but I've discovered that I'm up for the challenge because of the support I get from my family and the Marfan Foundation. I'm a work in progress as I journey through my senior year of high school. I know that my disease will continue to present new challenges. I realize now, however, that I am supported by so many. My supporters make all the difference in how I deal with the emotional trauma I've experienced. They help me find the positives from my diagnosis. For example, I've had a lot more time to devote to academics. I even carried over a 4.0 GPA last school year, taking multiple college level classes. In addition, I found inner strength that I didn't have before. This strength allows me to talk to others about Marfan syndrome. Lastly, I have found that my family and friends love and accept me for who I am, even though I'm not the athlete I was when my high school journey began. But I'm okay with that. I found peace through my challenges, all because of my supporters. And then here are some things that I would recommend to teens that are facing a similar diagnosis. 1, develop a good relationship with your specialist. My doctor is Dr. Mary Shepard at the University of Kentucky, and I talk to her about anything. She includes me in important conversations about medication and healthy lifestyle. I know that I can ask her for anything, and she always has time for my questions. Number 2, be an advocate for yourself at school. Know what your rights are and make sure that you are comfortable while at school. 3, don't let your diagnosis keep you from making future plans, like going away for college and having fun. Number 4, take charge of your health. Exercise according to what your doctor says, eat healthy, and give your body plenty of rest. Also, take all the medications that your doctor wants you to take. 5, get involved with the Marfan Foundation to help save lives. You can advocate, fundraise, write letters, and be a social media presence. These activities look great on college and scholarship applications.
So I'm Kelly, I'm Luke's mom. I had never heard of Marfan syndrome until Luke's doctor mentioned it during a middle school well check. This was with a new doctor. She was concerned because he had stretch marks that ran across his back, and he had the tall, lanky build, had the sunken in chest, and the stretch marks in his chest had gotten a lot worse since his last checkup. So she was going to refer him for some testing. Of course, when we got home from the appointment, I do what everyone does. I researched for hours, and I knew before we went to have any of the tests done that he would test positive, because he checked so many of the boxes of the physical indicators that we look for. And I started thinking back to when Luke was a toddler, and his pediatrician said that he was going to be, 7 feet tall. And when he was in elementary school, he had a speech therapist that noticed some orthodontic and facial abnormalities, even though they were very small. So we went for our first round of tests, and it showed that his aortic root in middle school was in the upper normal range, and that he didn't meet enough of the characteristics to warrant genetic testing. They wanted us to follow up in 3 years. So I left that appointment feeling really confused about what to do. And Luke started basketball in high school. He was a great basketball player, and we had some great times with that. As he was playing high school basketball, he started experiencing lots of aches and pains that were just associated and explained away as being sports injuries, or from being from scoliosis, which was a new diagnosis that he got in high school. And we realized that no matter how hard Luke trained, he never had the wind and the endurance that his teammates had. And then also his chest, it just seemed to be sinking deeper into his body. So at that time, our pediatrician that first mentioned Marfan syndrome, she referred us to the University of Kentucky, to a surgeon there, and that surgeon recommended the Nuss procedure. That was a really, really tough time for us. I think as a family, that was probably our roughest time, just because the recovery was so difficult. And we still didn't have the Marfan diagnosis at that time. And he spent lots and lots of time in physical therapy. And that was where he got most of his pain relief from. So after several months, he made it back out onto the basketball court, but his aches and pains continued. Came time for the NUS bar to come out 2 years later. And at that time, I asked the surgeon if he knew anyone there locally at the University of Kentucky that would do the follow-up from that first round 3 years ago of testing that we had. And so he referred us to Dr. Mary Shepard, and she's a doctor there at the university that is a Marfan patient herself. And so we went to meet with her, and I'll never forget that day when she diagnosed him with Marfan syndrome. And I remember Luke crying, and not about the diagnosis himself, but that he would never get to play basketball again. And I was crushed. As a mom, you know, you want to take their pain away, you want to trade places, you just want to make it better. And there was nothing that I could do. And that was definitely the worst day for me as a parent. And then I turned to the anger phase. I started asking all the questions like, why is it my kid? You know, why does he have this? He doesn't deserve it. I became very mad at everyone and everything. I was upset that the diagnosis took so long, that, you know, we had to go through so many different people to get there. Why more doctors weren't aware of the warning signs. It was just a really rough few months after we got the diagnosis. I remember I couldn't even go and watch my stepsons play any of their sports or sporting events without crying, because in my mind, I knew that I would never get to see Luke do that again. And even lately, when you know, it's his senior year of high school, they had senior night for the basketball team. And just knowing that we should have been there was really tough. So I will say though, like Allison, your emotions change as you go through the process. After I got through some extreme anger, I became laser focused on helping Luke get the follow-up care that he needed to stay safe, to stay healthy. And that's where the Marfan Foundation really helped me, because I was able to get all of the resources that I needed for his school teachers, for his nurse, and for anyone that interacted with him. And I can say that, you know, even though the sadness and anger occasionally creep back in, for the most part, I'm in a good place. But having a child with a chronic illness it's really tough. And like Allison said, having a support system makes it easier. So just some other things that I would recommend for parents that have school-age children with a connective tissue disorder is just to say that, you know, it's okay to be sad and to be angry and every other emotion. And that it's really important that you take care of yourself as the caregiver as well, and find someone to talk to because you need that. Next, talk with your child's school about getting paperwork on an emergency health plan and a 504 plan. And each state's a little different for that and country. But as a teacher, I know that's something I appreciate. And it's going to tell you what accommodations and things that your child can have at school to make them comfortable and safe. The next thing I would recommend is just being your child's #1 advocate. So even though they have an emergency health plan and learning plans in place, I make it a point to reach out to all of his teachers before the school year starts, letting them know about what Marfan syndrome is, but more importantly, what signs to look for in an emergency, since we know that patients are at risk for dissection, aneurysms, things like that. And so I always make it a point to make sure that every teacher is aware of all of that. You know, when your child goes to college, we're going through that process right now. There's a disability office at every college that will work with you if you reach out to them and initiate that. And then I would recommend just having a really good dialogue with your child as they get older. You know, they have lots of questions about family planning, you know, healthy living. You just got to have a really good open dialogue between the two of you. I would recommend making sure you have a great team of doctors. I'm really grateful for the University of Kentucky and the team that we have that surround Luke. And as they transition him from pediatric surgeons and specialists into adult surgeons and everything, it's been a team effort. They're great. And then lastly, just get involved with the Marfan Foundation. It has been so great to have a support system. You know, it's kind of like having a family. They can provide you with all of the resources that you need. And for us being diagnosed during COVID, it has been especially helpful because, you know, we haven't been able to meet up around people. And so it's been just a great tool to have there.
My name is Crystal Kmeyer. I'm 40 years old and I got diagnosed with Marfan syndrome officially 7 years ago. But a lot of people who usually get diagnosed later on in life, unlike them, it wasn't a sudden thing for me. I knew about Marfan syndrome since I was a kid. I have pectus carinatum, or pigeon chest. And when I was a kid, I went to an orthopedic surgeon and had to have my chest repaired and corrected, which is something I have in common with Luke, which is a very difficult thing to go through, especially when you're young. That's when Marfan syndrome was first mentioned. But my parents didn't really get, I think, a good understanding of what it was. I think it just kind of got lost in the medical jargon of what I was going through at that time with my chest surgeries. And I had 3 surgeries total on my chest as I was growing up as well, but never really a lot of talk about Marfan syndrome. When I was 19, after I had been experiencing some pretty scary health events where I ended up in the ER quite a few times for chest pains, arrhythmia, not being able to breathe, I finally got a referral to the University of Washington. And then I had a clinical evaluation when I was 19 for Marfan syndrome. And also, like Luke, at that time, I was inconclusive. I had a lot of the key features of Marfan syndrome. I'm really tall, I'm really thin, but I'm also like really proportional. I'm, you know, I have, you know, an evenness about me that I guess is unique. So they said, well, we can't confirm that you have Marfan syndrome, but we can't rule it out. It's probable you do. And that was really where I kind of lived in for a very long time, in this area of limbo. It was a struggle for me to get doctors to listen to me or to take concerns seriously. It was, well, maybe it's Marfan, maybe it's not. And I didn't really understand that much about Marfan syndrome myself until I got to North Carolina, and I did like a lot of frustrated people do nowadays. When they can't get answers, I turn to the internet, and that's where I found at that time the National Marfan Foundation, and I registered for some more information. And one thing that happened is I got a pamphlet in the mail with this is all the signs and syndromes of Marfan syndrome. And then the next thing, I got a phone call. And that phone call changed my life, because it was the first time I could have someone that I could talk to about what I was going through, the things I was experiencing, the kind of health issues I had that was coming up, and someone who could listen and get it and say, you know what, I think that sounds like something. And I went to a few different things, with the Marfan Foundation to talk to people, to get more information. I went to a support meeting in Seattle, and that's where I met Dr. Byers from the University of Washington. Dr. Byers was able to see enough in me to want to do a genetic test. And that's when at 33 years old, I finally got my answer that I did actually have Marfan syndrome. I don't have a lot of the typical concerns. I've got really great vision. I have, pretty lucky, knock on wood, so far that I don't have a lot of significant aortic enlargement yet. But that still doesn't mean like I was gonna be in the clear. And when you learn about being diagnosed with something as serious as what this condition is, you do go through every gamut of emotions when dealing with it. The anger, the pain, because you hear, the first thing you hear is the word incurable. And then the second thing you hear is the list of don'ts, the list of things you can't do anymore. All the all the fun stuff just got taken out of it. That's very hard to cope with when you're halfway through your life, to have to suddenly think about changing everything in your life. And you wonder, well, can I even, have the same kind of life that I enjoyed? And I had a very active, very on the go, kind of lifestyle. And I felt like for a while, like I couldn't, could I even do anything? But I stayed connected with the Marfan Foundation because, they had helped me so much. And through that, being able to talk to people, you start to realize that there are really wonderful things that you get from it. I take every opportunity that I get to help out and advocate for other people to learn about Marfan syndrome, because someone took the time and did that with me. And that meant the world to me at that moment. And I also had to realize that, okay, I can't change that I have this. So maybe I can change, how to still be the kind of person that I was, to have the kind of life that I love, just, like with Marfan syndrome. So I still take every opportunity I have to create new experiences and try fun things, as long as I keep it within my limitations. And then the other thing I've learned is that sometimes you gotta kind of find the humor and the good in with the bad. So my favorite thing is I like to call it my get out of free jail card, is that you can't do any heavy, strenuous activities. You can't do any sports. You can't go with your friends to play, a game of basketball. Well, I can't play football with my brothers anymore. Which those things are really sad to lose. But it also means that, every time I have a girlfriend that gets a wild hair and wants to try some new CrossFit class, I can say, oh, I'm sorry, I can't. Because who wants to try CrossFit? Not me. I'm much more in the realizing that I can do things like still be active. I go on long walks in nature. I go for long bike rides. I still enjoy activity, but I enjoy activity that I know is safe and comfortable for me. And I have taken total control over how I choose to try to keep my lifestyle while still coping with this, because that to ground yourself with living with a constant medical condition, you have to have those times where you feel like you can get out and just live life again. And part of me getting out and living life again has been really being involved with the Marfan Foundation, which means more than I can say that there was something out there. There was a place that I could go to that was able to help me find answers, because without the Marfan Foundation, I would not have gotten a diagnosis.
So I am the not as young Steve Martman. I am from Queens, New York, and I live with my wife and 8-year-old son, and our son also has Marfan syndrome. I was diagnosed at age 25 as a result of a rupture of my ascending aorta. I'd never heard of Marfan syndrome, and my aorta ended up reaching about 10 centimeters, and I decided that's enough. I have many of the classic symptoms and hadn't been previously diagnosed. I was 6'6", kind of tall and lanky, pectus carinatum, and some slight scoliosis. Throughout my medical journey, I've had about 20 procedures to correct cardiac, vascular, hernia problems, retinal concerns. I've had most of my aorta replaced. I've had retinal detachment in both eyes. I've had incisional hernias, and at some point developed endocarditis, just an infection I picked up along the way. As Jill mentioned in the beginning, and as others have described, getting diagnosed was very impactful on my psychological and even emotional state. I was scared, I was angry, I was confused. I found myself often frustrated, feeling helpless, and even at times resentful. At age 25, it caused me to face my mortality and rethink all my life choices, whether it was my career, my social relationships, physical activities, exercise, my finances, pretty much everything. It affected who I was, who I interacted with. It affected every choice I made from that point on. I felt like I was second guessing because of new limitations and new medications. As part of my first surgery, I got a mechanical heart valve, which meant at age 25, I started taking Coumadin, and that was a lifelong commitment. It just changed everything. And I didn't know what to make of it. I didn't know where to put that in my mental makeup, if you will. Within weeks of being diagnosed and recovering from that first surgery, what was the first support I found, and the best support I've had throughout my entire journey, had been connecting with the Marfan Foundation. The foundation welcomed me in as one of their own. They had never met me before, but I was immediately family. They gave me hope that I didn't think possible. I've been able to get support, and in time learned how to provide support. I volunteered for public relations campaigns. I conducted and attended workshops at annual conference. I presented my story at physician grand rounds, participated in community activities, and I even served on the Marfan board for, I believe it was 7 years. Through all the support I've gotten and throughout my journey, it has taken quite a bit. It has taken a lot of people in the Marfan community and in my personal life to help me find peace with this and integrate Marfan into my life and not let it define me. In my career, I had to change gears. I was all set up to just before I was diagnosed, I was all lined up to join the New York City Police Academy. I couldn't do that anymore, and I had to change everything and decided to pursue. I was working a little bit of a job in mental health and decided to pursue a career as a social worker and later in healthcare management, which has been very, very rewarding. And it was a turn I am very grateful for, despite it not being my original plan. In getting back to my family, my wife has been there through everything as well. I've known my wife through about half my journey, and together we now support our son. He's again 8 years old as he lives through his journey. We focus on what is possible for him and what he is capable of, rather than dwell on any limitations. We normalize his experience as part of his life, and that it doesn't define him. He's been able to attend a couple of the conferences already, and then COVID hit, and we're looking forward to going back to conference this summer and helping him along in his journey and all that, and helping him appreciate that this is a part of his life. It doesn't define him. And whether it's, whatever he chooses to do in life, whatever I've gone through in life, it's all about those connections within the community, outside the community, whatever it is, but to find some way to make peace with it.